Okay, so this is solving sums and differences of cubes. So that's pretty much all there is. We're just going to get into it. So this is similar to when we solved with factoring before. The only difference is we're going to end up with a quadratic that we're going to have to solve using the quadratic formula, which is going to give us two imaginary numbers. So we'll get talking about that here in a second. Our normal procedure for my steps that I made to solve. First thing, just like any other problem, we need to set it equal to 0. Then we need to factor, just like we did in the last lesson, the sum or difference of cubes. Then we're going to solve the binomial first in front. That one's going to be hopefully pretty easy, pretty straightforward, nothing new. And then the last step is going to be using the quadratic formula to solve the rest of it, the trinomial. That's going to be a quadratic. And this part will always give you two imaginary solutions. Now, really, these problems are a little bit longer. They take a little bit of time, but it comes down to, in my opinion, the hardest part is doing the quadratic formula. So this is the first one that we talked about in the last lesson. We set it up, but we didn't actually solve it. So we have our equation here. We got it equal to 0. That was step 1, and then we factored it. When we factor it, we have the binomial about, and this is then the trinomial. When you solve this one, it's the same thing we've always done. This part is 0. Oops. Oh my gosh. Okay. If this part we can get equal to 0, then we have 0 multiplied by whatever this stuff is going to end up being. That's not right. Whatever number that ends up being, 0 times anything is 0. So this is the same thing as what before. So we want that binomial to be 0. So again, two ways to do that. You can look at and just ask yourself, what would you plug in for x to get 0? Negative 9 plus 9 is 0. If you didn't know that, you could always do x plus 9 is equal to 0. Subtract 9 from both sides, x is equal to negative 9. Now again, I don't want you to think of that it's the opposite of here. So positive 9 gives you negative 9. Sometimes that does work, but if you end up with one that has a number in front, so like 2x plus 3, now all of a sudden it's not negative 3, you actually have to solve that. So just make sure you're being aware of that. And again, that's nothing new. We did that with the other factoring stuff. Then the rest of this, we have where we're going to do the quadratic formula and get two imaginary numbers. Now, here's the good thing with this. Here's the good news. It's always going to give you two imaginary, and you always use a quadratic formula. At first, when I looked at this, I thought this was going to be a headache because you try to use factoring. Hopefully it works, but it might not, and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to try factoring. Don't do any of that. Just go ahead and do the quadratic formula, and you'll always get two imaginary numbers. So let's go ahead and plug that in. So quadratic formula, my A is 1, my B is 9, my C is 81. So I plug that in. So x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A is 1. Now here's the thing, if you put this in your calculator, like before, I told you guys you just type that in your calculator exactly how you see it. If you do that, the problem is going to be it's going to give you undefined or it's going to give you an error message somewhere. And the reason is because this gives you imaginary numbers. So we're going to have to do this a little bit differently. Now we're still obviously going to use our calculator and it's not much different. You're just going to have to take the steps that I used to take when I taught you guys the first time. So I'm going to clean everything up. That's 9 plus or minus, that's 2 down here. And then this is the square root. Put everything in here in your calculator. Make sure you use parentheses. Again, a lot of people missed this last time because they just put negative 9 squared in their calculator. You need parentheses. But if you do that, you get negative 243. Well, now is where you can use your calculator. Because now I know that it's a negative. It's negative 243. So now just take out that negative to give it an I. So this is 9 plus or minus I times positive 243. Now there's two ways to do this with your calculator. You can either use your calculator to get rid of, just don't type that I in there. So 9 plus or minus square root of 243 over 3 and simplify that. So you could type it all in without the I. Or the way I would do it, honestly, I would just type in this last part, square root of 243. If you do that in your calculator, and I'm not going to make you show work when you reduce that radical, there will be other ones on the test that you have to reduce, so I'm going to be more particular on that. This one you don't have to show your work. You just put it in your calculator. You end up getting 9 plus or minus 9i root 3 over 2. Now, occasionally you can reduce this. I'm not going to make you do that. I'm not going to require you to reduce it, but I do need to get it in this form. I don't want decimals for this one because we have that imaginary we're dealing with, and when you have decimals and imaginaries, that's a little bit different. So that is the best answer for this one. We'll go over some other ones where you can reduce a little bit. The next one we can. Now, here's the other discovery I made. Basically, I'm fairly confident in this, but you know how I am, I'm never 100%. It's everyone that I've done so far, and I'm pretty sure these two numbers are always the same. And this is always a root 3. When I did this, I did the worksheet answers, and a lot of them got to be like that. All of them were like that, and I was really interested. And so I did a whole proof and crunched some numbers, and I think that should work every time. And that actually is pretty interesting. But anyway, there's a shortcut you can kind of do if you know that stuff. But just make sure to double check your work. Those two numbers are the same, those 9s, and then it's always going to be a square root 3. Just kind of ends up that way. Okay. Let's go ahead and do number 2 then. So this one, subtract the 512 for both sides. So we have x to the third minus 512 is equal to 0. And from here, we need to get our numbers, our a and our b. So my b, what was it, 512? So 512, oh, I was looking at the squared side. One more. 512 is right here, so that's 8. So my a is x, and then 8 to the third, 0. So this is what we did yesterday, or the last lesson where we were factoring this stuff. X minus 8. Then we have a squared. Now it's plus because in the other parentheses. A times b is 8. X is 8x. Plus, it's always b squared is 64. B. A bad idea. So one of my answers is pretty easy, is 8. Don't forget about that one. We kind of forgot that one in this over here, this mess. But the good news is we have it in a box, so that's going to be one of your answers. The other one, we're going to have to use a quadratic formula. So to make it look a little bit nicer on here, my A is 1, my B, actually do this way, B, 4. So we have x is equal to negative 8 plus or minus 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times 64 over 2 times A. Again, when you put this in your calculator, 8. This is the part I put in my calculator, the square root part. Because again, if you put the whole thing in your calculator from the very beginning, this part, the whole thing, it's going to give you an error because it's imaginary. So when you put this in, you end up getting negative 192. So when you now put that in your calculator, so forget about the negative, just put the I here. That's one way you could think of it. And again, you can just put the square root of 192 in your calculator. You end up getting negative 8 plus or minus 8i root 3 all over 2. Now again, this is where, again, you can double check your work like I said. These two numbers are the same. This one is a square root of 3, so you're good. Sorry, I'm going to reset. So if you put this as your answer, that's fine. However, if you're doing multiple choice, this will not be your answer because we can still reduce between this 8, and this 2, since all three of those places, now not this part over here, we don't care about the square root. Don't touch that radical at all, just keep it there. But between the 8 and the 2, we can divide those just like a normal fraction. So if we divide them all by 2, we get negative 4 plus or minus 4i root 3 over 1. So that's the best answer. Again, if you have this answer and short answer, that's fine. I'll count it. The other way you can do it is from here, right here. If you put that in your calculator, you just ignored the I and then you just plug the I in when you were done. Your calculator will do that work for you. So that's another way to do it from the very beginning when you have the 192. Just take out the negative, put it in your calculator, and then just put in the I when you're done. And that's where you get three answers. And I guess I didn't elaborate on this, but one of our answers is over here, x is equal to 8. And then the other two answers are this one, because we have a plus gives us one answer and the minus gives us the other answer. The other interesting thing about this, and I don't know how much we'll learn about this later, since we're 3, that means we'll have 3 answers. Some of them are imaginary, but that's why we have 3 answers. Remember, with quadratics, we almost always had 2 answers. It's because a quadratic had a degree of 2. All right, let's look at one. So this one has a leading coefficient with it, so this is a little bit different. So this is 2x to the third is your A, and your B is 343, I think was 7. Yep. So my A is 2x, my B is 7. Now be careful, because when you're doing the quadratic formula, that A and B are different. So make sure you be careful with that when you're using the quadratic formula. So we end up with 2x plus 7, since we kept a plus here, times 2x squared, remember, is 4x squared. You have to square the 2 and the x, minus 2x times 7 is 14x, plus 7 squared. So this is what I was talking about earlier. This answer over here is not just -7. You actually have to solve that. Or, I mean, you can do it in your head. That's fine. But I would caution you of that, most definitely. So 2x plus 7 is equal to 0. If you subtract 7 from both sides, and then if you divide by 2, you get -7 over 2. If you make that a decimal, that's fine as well. So that's one of your answers. Let me erase some of this. Since you guys can rewind, you can always go back and look at that answer. Now the other part, just like I did before, now I have to use a quadratic formula. So my A for the quadratic formula is 4, my B is -14, my C is 49. Now again, that's different than the A and B I had over here, so don't get confused by that. So I get, change my over here, x is equal to -14 plus or minus the square root of -14 squared minus 4 times A times B. Or sorry, 4 times A times C. That was close. And remember, you'll get the quadratic formula, so you won't make that mistake on test. You'll have the quadratic formula just like I gave it to you on the last test. And then over 2 times A. So that is positive 14 plus or minus, this is 8. When you put the other part in your calculator, you end up getting -588. So again, honestly, the way I would do it is I would just forget about that negative. I could leave it as positive 588, and then I'd put it in my calculator. And then just put the I in your answer. Don't forget to put that in your answer. So if you don't do it that way, you end up getting 14 plus or minus I times 4, or sorry, not I, let me take that. The I is in there. I'm just gonna move to a different spot. Plus or minus. So the square root of 588 ends up being 14 times √3, but we have that I in there. Sorry, my handwriting is bad when it gets small like this. Over 8. But again, if you do it this way, hopefully, in short answer, that's fine. You can leave that as your answer. But these 3 spots, color, the 14, and the 8, those 3 spots can all be reduced. You can divide all of them by 2. So you end up with 7 plus or minus 7 I √3 over 4. That is the best answer. Again, so these are our 3 answers. This one is the real answer. These are the 2 imaginary. Again, if you have this as your answer, that's fine, but with multiple choice, it'll probably be this. Last but not least, again, if you just type this in your calculator, just make that a positive, type it in your calculator, then when you're done, just make sure you put the I in there. If you do that, I think you'll skip right to the answer. And the last one before the you do section here. Oh, one thing I want to mention with this one, and I messed this up. Technically, it's still doable, but to make your life easier, take out this negative right here. I want to change that. Again, it's still doable. It's just I want to be consistent. I don't think you'll have any of those. You won't. I'll take them off. So change that. Go ahead and change that to Your notes have a negative there. And again, if you've already done it, if you worked ahead a little bit, that's fine. I think it works out. I don't know what the answer is off the top of my head, but I think it makes it easier if it's a plus. So from here, same as before, add 25, add 25. So 2 was 16, x to the third, plus 125. Now we can do our factoring. So 216, got to go higher, is 6. 6x to the third is 5. So that means your A is x, your B is 5. So we end up with x plus 5 multiplied by 6x squared. Remember 6 squared and x squared. Then this is going to be a minus. 6x times 5 is 30x plus 5 times 5 is 25. So again, it looks like a mess, but really it's not too bad because you're just using the quadratic formula. Whether it's a 36 in front or a 2 in front, you're going to use a quadratic formula. So it's not really that bad, even with bigger numbers, especially because you can use your calculator. Go ahead and solve it for x. Subtract 5. We got 6x is equal to negative 5. 5 by 6. X is equal to negative 5 over 6. So that's your first answer. That's your real answer. Now, to get your two imaginary numbers, this is where we're using the quadratic formula. So A is 36, B is negative 30, and C is 25. So X is equal to negative 30 plus or minus negative 30 squared minus 4 times 36 times 25, 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A is 36. So negative 30 is positive 30, plus and minus 2 times 36 is 72. Inside the square root, you end up getting negative 2700. Now again, I'm going to strongly encourage you, take out the negative, and then just plug an I into your answer. Just take out the negative, put this in your calculator, so it reduces it all down. I guess I will say I don't want decimals. So when you put it in your calculator, I don't think it gives you decimals. I don't know how that works. I forget. But at the very least, I would just use my calculator at least to reduce that part. I don't have one of your calculators, one of those little Casios with me, so I don't actually know what it looks like. But from here, you end up getting 30. I'm going to run out of room. You end up getting 30 plus or minus 30i times the square root of 3. Again, those two 30s are the same, if that helps you out at all. And it's always going to be root 3. That's over 72. But again, we can reduce that down. The 30, the 30, and the 72. It's always if all three of those, not just one of them, all three of them have to reduce, just like a fraction. If you divide them all by 6, you get 5 plus or minus 5i times root 3 over 72 divided by 6 is 12. Remember, you don't do anything with the root 3. When you divide by 6 or when you reduce, it's only these three spots, not the radical ever. All right. Now, again, you can double check your work really quickly. These 5s are the same, so that's good. And this is always going to be a 3. And again, those two numbers are the same even at the very beginning. When I knew this was 30, before I reduced this down in the calculator, I know it had to be 30 root 3 because these two are always going to be the same, and this one's always going to be root 3. So that's a little hint that I can give you to kind of use a little shortcut or to check your work. Do these on your own. Once you're done doing these on your own, I would hit play. You can do it for each one individually or the whole thing, but do them on your own, then hit play so you can check your answers. Honestly, I would fast forward through all the work I'm going to show you till you see your answer, and then if you miss it, then go back, rewind, and watch the process. But if you do all 4 of these fine, you don't have to watch me go through them step by step. Again, if you miss number 6, rewind and then see how I did it. That way you can catch your mistakes. Okay. Subtract 27. We get x to the third minus 27 is equal to 0. So this one is x to the third, 27 is minus 3 times x plus 9. And if you're wondering how I'm getting this part right here, it's the formula that I gave you in the 5.4 notes. In the previous notes, check that formula if you're not sure where I'm getting these. And the biggest thing is this is minus, always plus. This one's always plus. And then remember the formula, once you have your A and your B, this is your A squared, B, this is your B squared. Anyway, if you're confused at all on that, watch the video 5.4. It's all in the classroom. Okay. Oh, it's because my thumb's hitting it. Okay. So we already know one of our answers is 3. The other answers, my B is 3, my C is 9. The square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A is 1. 3, 2. Inside the square root for this one, you end up getting negative 27. Now again, I know my 27 is going to reduce down to 3 root 3. And the reason is because I use this one, and they all end in a square root of 3. So without even putting that in my calculator, I know it's going to be 3 plus or minus 3 root 3. But since it's a negative 27, it's got to be an I. Once you've done that, then you can try to go ahead and see if you can reduce. Again, the 3 parts you're checking for reducing is these 3 spots, the 2 3s and the 2. You can't reduce, so that is your answer. These are the other 2 over here. All right, I'm gonna have to make some space, so I'm gonna erase this. Again, if you need to see that, just rewind. It's the beauty of videos. And we're doing the same thing over here. So when we factor, we have x. Get a little more space. Change my color. X to the third, and then 216 is 6, maybe? Yeah, 6 to the third. So my A is X. This is B is 6. Is X plus 6 times A squared minus, because it's got to be the opposite sign, A times B is X times 6 plus B squared is 36. So my first 0 is an easy one. That's negative 6. That's what makes this 0. Then my second one, we have to use a quadratic formula. So my A is 1, B is negative 6, C is 36. So I have X is equal to, and sorry, this is kind of a mess all over the place, but I'm trying to fit everything in. Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 36 all over 2 times 1, which then you end up with X is equal to positive 6 plus or minus over 2, and it's the square root of, put that in your calculator, negative 108. Now again, the shortcut to this, and I guess I could have talked about it before, I know that that 108 has to be 6 root 3. Sorry. Oh, never mind. I was looking at my paper and I thought I made a mistake. I know it's going to be 6 root 3 because the first number has to be the same as this one. It always works out that way, and it's always root 3. But you can put a calculator or put it in your calculator. 6 plus or minus 6 root 3. That's your I over 2. Then again, if you have that as your answer, that's completely fine. But with multiple choice, these 3 spots can reduce, and so that's what you're going to try to reduce. So we can divide all of them by 2. X is equal to 3 plus or minus 3I root 3. And 343 to both sides. So 6x to the third plus 343 minus. Sorry, that's sloppy. And hope that down. 64x to the third. That's 4x to the third and 7 to the third. We factor everything out. X 4x squared on the x 4 as well minus x 4, sorry, 7 times 4x is 28x plus squared is 49 plus 7 from both sides, so 4x equals. So that's my real zero, even if it's a decimal, that's fine. Your imaginary zero, go back, put your numbers in. A is 16, B is 49. I'm just going to have to use up too much room and erase. That's fine. Negative 28 plus or minus the square root of negative 28 squared minus 4 times A is 16 times C is 49 all over 2 times A is 16. Clean everything up, that's 28 plus or minus 2 times 16 is 32. Again, I know it's going to end up being 28 root 3. We might reduce it when we're done with that, but I know it's got to start with 28 root 3 with the I in there, because these two numbers are always going to be the same, and it's always going to be a square root of 3. Again, I'm not super confident in my math ability, which sounds strange as a math teacher, but it's just who I am. But I'm 99% sure, probably more than that, 99.9% sure that that works out every time, for our purposes at least. So with this one, you can reduce, again, leave that as your answer, that's fine, but we can reduce the 28, the 28, and the 32. If we do that, we end up getting, divide everything by 4, we get 7 plus or minus 7I root 3 over 8. Sorry if I didn't leave you enough room. I'm thinking you guys probably have enough room. I tried to leave a lot, but with this touch screen and the stylus and everything, if I write much smaller than that, it's a nightmare. And the last one. Okay. Subtract 77. 512 x to the third. 50 minus 77 is negative 27. So 512, I want to say that was 6. And I know I just looked it up, but no, it's not. It's 8. It's close. Should have been a better guess. So that's 8x to the third minus 3 to the third. So that is your A and your B for your factoring part. So we have A minus B for this one, because it's a minus, times 8x squared is 64x squared, plus times 3 is 24x, plus 3 squared is 9. So one of our answers, a real answer isn't too bad. 8x minus 3 is equal to 0. Add 3 to both sides. Divide both sides by 8. And the other one, we're using quadratic formula. So our A is 64. Our B is 24. Our C is 9. So plug that in. We get x is equal to negative 24 plus or minus the square root of 24 squared. I'm not going to have enough room. 24 squared minus 4 times 64 times 9. It's a nightmare. Let me just redo that part. I know this is a waste of time, but we're using these numbers. So I'm coming back here because I need room. 24 squared minus 4 times A is 64 times C is 9 over 2 times A is 4. So I know this seems like a long problem, a big number when you use a calculator, but I can assure you, 3 with an I there, 1. In a short answer problem, that is, you can leave it like that, but you can read 28. All three of those you can divide by 8, I believe. Plus or minus 3I root 3 over 16. And again, I think you can even on your calculator, just not with the I, just forget about the I, and I think it reduces it for you. Just remember to put the I back in your answer. So again, the three answers are, this one's 2 because it's plus or minus, and this one is the other one. These two are imaginary because of the I. This one is real. So if you have any questions, make sure you let me know. Thanks.